Hey Nibblings, I want to talk about one of my favorite topics regarding learning art, and that's art books. Something that I personally spend way too much money on. I still have a ton of art books back there I have not read yet. And I have a lot of art books that I have read. And I just kind of want to talk about like what books are actually worth getting and which ones are worth reading front to back, and which ones are really just kind of like little bits and pieces, and just how my experience has been going through all of these art books. Because for a while I did buy a lot of art books and I just did not use them the way that I needed to. But the last few years I have really been trying my best to get through a lot of art books and really try to absorb them the best that I can. And so I figured it'd be good information to share. And I mean, like, I do have like a ton of books that I want to talk about and really share the details of. So yeah, let's get into it. So really quick, there's a couple of things that I want to mention because of how I try to buy books. There's a few set categories of the types of books that I try to get, right? So there is a reference books, so like books of other people's artworks, books of like anatomy references, that kind of thing. There are also books that are like specifically on like just drawing in general and like being able to learn some of the fundamentals and being able to move forward with some of that stuff, because some of these books I bought as a beginner and some of them kind of in the intermediate phase, and I would say I'm like really doing my best to get out of the intermediate into the professional phase at this stage. And so there's some of those in there. And then also you're going to see that I have a lot of books specific to getting better at one type of medium. So those mediums are typically drawing comics. That's the one that I have enjoyed the most. Although I do have some regarding just like general painting, usually digital painting actually, and also just like pen and pencil. So you'll see some of that. So if you're looking for something that's like watercolor or acrylic or pastels or something specific to those mediums, you're really not going to see that here. So sorry to disappoint there. All the other stuff though I will be talking about, and I will talk about very specific books and which ones I recommend and how I recommend that you use them, because there's some really good books here, like some really good stuff that I really don't see that much in even just like free YouTube art tutorials. I think some of these people are like very seasoned, like veterans of the art industry, and they just drop their whole like brain into this book. And so it's really good to be able to like pick like very specific people's brains and be able to like figure out the way that they think about artwork and the way that they approach it. And it's also just really handy to have something physical to be able to reference. So that's why I do recommend them. But obviously if you're, if you got a tight budget, you really can't be spending a lot of money on art books. I do have some that I recommend that you start with depending on where you are. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so the first one we're going to start with is regarding like general art book learnings, and ones that you should take advantage of, which ones you might get the most out of depending on where you are. So let's assume that you are a beginner, like you are, this is baby's first art book. There's a couple that I highly recommend. And even if you are maybe intermediate, like early intermediate or late beginner, I still highly recommend you get these books because they are super helpful if you really like read it, digest it, and practice it. That is like the most important part about these art books, is that you should try it out. You should definitely practice it. One thing that I do, I've got this little, like, I just got this on Amazon, right? This just like book holder, and I will just open the book and prop it on here, and I will draw right behind me. And that has been super helpful in like getting some practice out of these books, because it is kind of weird to like hold the book open and like it doesn't quite open all the way, especially if it's not like a hardback. So I recommend doing it. It's like super cheap. It's like $10 or something. So first one, Perspective Made Easy. This is kind of an old book. So you really have some pretty old looking drawings in there. It looks super boring. But you can actually get through this book pretty easy. Like, it's not filled with a ton of text. Like, this text is like big font size and like not a ton. And so if you don't really know perspective, you haven't really taken a lot of classes in perspective, it makes it super easy to understand, and it has great illustrations to point out what they mean by certain things, like describing what the eye line is versus like the horizon line, and being able to tell you what the difference between those two are. And if you do know what perspective is, and you maybe could use with a little bit more advanced things, there are some other stuff deeper in here about like being able to draw perspective inside of a room, being able to understand like drawing in perspective whenever you are drawing like a pattern that is fading into the background, like a checkerboard pattern, right? You might not always get it correct, and so it gives you really good illustrations, really good advice for how to do that in an easy way too. It gives you like the exact, like literal, like this is how you do it accurately, but it's not like rocket science. It's not that complicated. It is just trying to get you the general gist to be able to convince your audience that you know what you're doing. So again, highly recommend this book. It's not very expensive. It is a bit of an old one, but I feel like it's an essential one to get started with. If you are not really one of those people that's like, I kind of just like want to skip perspective, which you shouldn't. You should not. I'm gonna tell you right now, that's the wrong way to approach this. But if you are that person and you want to get started with like faces and people, I also highly recommend Drawing on the Right Side of Your Brain by Betty Edwards. This book is crazy good on getting people to start drawing a little bit better, because if your stuff looks like an 11-year-old drew it and you are kind of ashamed of drawing, this will get you out of it. I promise you this. If you do what this lady tells you, you will get better. I promise you. But here's the big but. It caps out, okay? So this person isn't necessarily teaching you the fundamentals of drawing. It's teaching you how to think about drawing. And so if you think about drawing the right way, pretty much just guarantees that you draw up to a certain level. I'm telling you. But then at that point, you have to learn your fundamentals. You have to, which is where books like these come in, right? So you can start with either one, right? But know what you need, and know that like a book like this will get you to draw something fairly decent and fairly believable, but you have to learn your fundamentals if you want to get better. Now, I want to show you the back of this because I think it is really impressive, and it is total, like they are not BSing, right? There are these little illustrations here, and you can kind of see like this drawing is not very good, right? You can see this drawing is not very good, and then this drawing is like pretty believable. This right here, and you probably cannot read it, but they are literally just like 2 months apart. Same person, right? So super helpful. If you stick to this, it is really, really good for somebody who is at the very, very beginner level. So highly recommend that one. If you want something that's like a little bit more fun, and maybe you have a decent amount of experience, I really recommend this Sketch Every Day. This is by Simone Grunwald. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this one is just a lot more fun. It has a lot of really nice illustrations. It is a little bit more of like a personal, like, here's how I do stuff, and like, here is my experience type of book. But This is a really good artist, and really kind of talks about a lot of different stuff. So their own experience, their own advice, how they became an artist, how they like found their style, different things that they were able to achieve, and also just some general advice. Like there is some stuff regarding perspective and being able to draw people in perspective. There's also more complicated things. This isn't very complicated, but this is color, right? I really liked this one talking about hair, because it is going through all of the hairstyles, or like how you might draw hair, but it also goes through drawing curly hair, which I feel like is often overlooked in art books. It is stylized, so that is something to keep in mind. But I think in general, the way that she is describing all of these tips can be applicable to just about any style. You're just watching it happen in her style. There are some more complex things in here, such as being able to draw like a reflection accurately. And so it really kind of goes from really small, like easy bits to a little bit more complex bits, but it's also not crazy. I think it's very motivating for a beginner artist, or somebody maybe in the intermediate phase. And so I do recommend that one. Sometimes it's nice to have those fun art books, and not just the ones that are yellow and like all about perspective. And I know that like when you look at this one, you go like, oh, that one's so boring. But like, you kind of need it. You kind of need it. If you're a little bit more advanced, I would recommend this figure drawing one. Right, this one is by Michael Hampton. I really enjoyed this one. It goes through a lot of complex figure drawing, but if you know anything about figure drawing, you know that it can get you really good at drawing, and also that there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. And just being able to practice some of this stuff. It even talks a little bit about anatomy and being able to accurately represent anatomy. So for example, here is one of the pages on anatomy. And it's not a ton of text. You can actually get through this fairly quickly. It didn't take me too long to go through it. Here's another anatomy page, because it's filled with these diagrams. And so these diagrams, you'll be able to just kind of like practice them a little bit and be able to reference them. Like I do recommend that you go through the activities here. Like the draw sketch every day. That might be one where like you're not doing every single activity in there, because maybe some of those aren't either at your level or they're not very helpful to you at the moment. But this one, I do recommend trying just about everything that you can and just working through it. Like it is one that I would try working like front to back. But take your time. Like you can get through it quick, but like take your time, because you just kind of want to like digest this information over time. And there are some that I would say, like, if you're struggling, like do it again. Like try it another couple times until you feel comfortable with it. Yeah, I've gone through this book one time, but I definitely look at this book and go like, I should revisit this a few times throughout my life, because there's a lot of really good stuff here. And I don't think it's really possible for one person to like go through it once and just like fully absorb everything that's in there. Okay, so now here's like a warning, right? Because I see this book recommended all the time. And I remember trying to go through it the same way that I went through the figure drawing book. And then going, am I like crazy? This is like really hard, and it's so like the cover is so deceiving in like what it's actually trying to get you to do. But this book is called How to Draw, right? And this is by Scott Robertson, along with Thomas Bertling. Okay. Now, let me be clear. This book is good. This book is very good. But it's not teaching you how to draw. It's trying to teach you how to accurately depict objects in 3D space, and it is making a ton of assumptions on what you already know. This, to me, is an early advanced book. This is not for beginners at all. Some of the stuff that's, and you can see my bookmark is in here, and I'm not that far in, okay? But some of this stuff is so highly technical, and you can get through a good amount of it just following the steps that are in the book. But you're gonna get to certain points where you're like, wait a minute, how did you get from like step 3 to step 4? Because I don't even know how you knew that line would get there, right? Because it's all super technical. It's all about depicting something accurately. So it's making a lot of assumptions of what you should already know. So that's why I warn people about getting this book right away, because it's not your first book. This is a book that will teach you a lot, but you gotta know a lot to really access this. Like, I'm just trying to show you some of the illustrations and just like how complex they can be, because they're trying to be as accurate as possible. Like it's like turning you into a 3D modeler, basically. It's really good though. Because it really addresses like everything, like wide angle lenses and being able to depict things properly. It even goes into like the anatomy of vehicles, including like airplanes and stuff. So, I mean, again, a really good book, but like this is not your first book. Avoid this book for a while. And when you feel like this is all intuitive, you know everything, and like you would get nothing out of reading this another time, and you've read like 3 more perspective books and feel the same way, then I feel like you can get that book. Then I feel like you can get how to draw. That's truly how I feel about it. I think that there's a lot of really good information in there, but it's not an easy book. It's one that you really want to hold off on for a little while. It's just deceiving in its title, I think. Okay, so now we're gonna get into one of my favorite parts is books about comics. I've really enjoyed this series of books. The first one I'm going to start with, and this one's less so about like drawing and more about the mindset that you should have, and is even talking a lot about like storytelling, and that is Manga in Theory and Practice by Hirohiko Araki, which is the guy who made the manga JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. In this book, and I've talked about it in another video before too, this book is amazing in its ability to translate some of the crazy ideas that this guy has. Because if you know anything about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, it's pretty wild. It's pretty crazy, like just the different stuff that this guy comes up with and just how he like coherently writes it into his story. And it is kind of like villain of the week type of story a lot of the times, but I think he's really good at that. Like, it's really entertaining the way that he is able to set that up. And there's reasons for that. Like, this is a template, of which I have a template. There's a video that I'll probably have an annotation for or something up here, where I have a link to my own template, because I took this and I put it into a spreadsheet and I use it myself for creating characters. This is the guy who like created this for me. And there's a lot of other really good stuff in here. And if you have, if you've read or watched JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, I think you'll also get more out of it, because you do get some perspective of how he created certain characters, and he uses some examples of things that actually do happen in the manga in order to explain why he does the things that he does and how it does benefit the story. That being said, if you have not read Steel Ball Run, or watched it if you're watching this in the future, and you want this, there are some spoilers for Steel Ball Run in here. I think there are even some spoilers for JoJolion. So that being said, be careful, because he will say some stuff about it. But a very good book, nonetheless. 2 books here. That is Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. This book is just, it's goated. It's so good. It's so good. And it's really entertaining, because it is a comic book about writing comics and just being able to understand the way that they work. And I mean, like, Scott McCloud is a wealth of knowledge for comic books. This guy really knows what he's talking about. It is kind of one of those surface level books that, like, this is a lot of people's first book, but I think that's for good reason. Like, I have 2 copies of this book. It is, like, well worth reading it, even if this kind of, like, goofy character style is not your thing. Like, he's putting in, you know, this character of himself into the Scream, you know? And so, like, he's able to really depict some of this stuff very well. And it's not just about, like, artwork, and it's not just about, like, being able to compare some of that stuff. Like, he goes into detail on, like, typography and some of the stuff that you don't really think about whenever you first think about making comics. And that's really important. That's really, really important. That being said, he does have other books. Like, he has this one called Reinventing Comics. And so there are some things, I don't think I have the 3rd book. I think this is the 2nd one. So he's talking about reinventing comics. And so he's kind of addressing his previous book and talking about what that looks like in like a new digital age, right? Because I'll double check here, but I believe this book was written in the 80s, 90s. Yes, this is written in the early 90s, right? And so when he's writing this Reinventing Comics, this is into the year 2000, right? So almost 10 years apart. And so he's starting to talk about, like, what do comics look like on the computer? So I think you're going to get diminishing returns with this one. Although there's some really interesting ideas in here. I think that after reading this one, I think that Scott McCloud was cautiously optimistic about the future of comics, and it didn't really work out the way that he thought that it might. Although it doesn't mean that it hasn't happened yet. So I guess I'll just leave it there. Diminishing returns. I think the first one is a guaranteed must get. The other ones, not 100% sure that you need to get them. You might actually be better served getting a drawing book instead. But this is a fun one. It's certainly got some good information in there, and might give you some good ideas as to how to make comics that stand out from the crowd. Another one that's pretty popular is Comics and Sequential Art by Will Eisner. This one's also just really, really good. This one is telling you a lot of the same information that Understanding Comics is. Not a lot of it differs in terms of, like, the content, but it is giving you a little bit more of a technical look at it rather than a, I guess, like, storytelling look, because Scott McCloud is literally telling it to you in a comic form, right? Whereas Will Eisner is going to give you the diagram, right, of the page layout, and so you're going to be able to see this stuff a little bit more for what the process really looks like. And it's pretty good. I really enjoyed this one. And again, you can get through it pretty quick because there's just so much, like, art in here that you can just reference to be able to understand the concept that he's trying to talk about. And the diagrams are also really helpful. There is also an entire section on, like, writing your story and, like, what that should look like. And I mean, this guy, like, really pioneered some of the comic industry, so I would highly recommend this book if it's something you're really serious about, that you really want to focus in on. And yeah, I mean, you're just getting it from a legendary guy, so I mean, I highly recommend it. Another one that I really, really like is Framed Ink. And Framed Ink is more about storyboards. And it's almost entirely about the composition of your storyboards and how to think about your storyboards. And I do think this book has a lot of really, really good info that it's worth revisiting often. That being said, it's not exclusive to comics, because storyboards You'll often see them done for film and for television in order to understand what shots are important to get. So if you're in that industry or if that sounds interesting to you, like this is your book. But it is also very applicable to comics because comic book artists are always storyboarding. But that being said, if you make like digital paintings or regular paintings, you should storyboard them first, even if it's just like a one small composition thumbnail. I know a few digital painters that are in the industry. This is what they do. They start with a really small one just to plan it out generally in their head. It doesn't take more than 5 minutes for some of them. And so I think this is also really helpful for that because again, it's all about composition pretty much. It's all about that. And it's also helping you use composition in order to tell your story really well. And so what I mean by that is you'll see, let's find a good set here. So like there's this whole section about like using this type of composition in a practical way, right? So it's blocking it out with just basic shapes and then showing you how you can use this in order to tell your story, right? Sorry, I'm kind of blocking some of that, but you can see how some of that would be applicable. And he's doing this all throughout, right? So like this guy is really good at being able to show some of that stuff, but it's not just composition, right? So most of it is, I would say, but you are getting some of like the shape language type of things that you'll see from a lot of artists. You're going to get a little bit of anatomy. And then you're also going to get some of the ideas of like being able to tell the story in several panels and being able to show that motion. And just a lot of really cool concepts. There's even this concept of like using different lenses, like a long lens and a wide angle lens here. So you're seeing the same, sorry, it's over here. You're seeing the same image, but this is like with the wide angle lens. This is a long lens, and this is kind of like more of a normal shot, right? But like you can barely see, but she's like still standing in between this building, right? And you can see the building up there. So you're getting some of that, and some of those ideas within drawing, right? Without even using a camera. So it's some really cool concepts there. Also, like a really cool idea is that, you know, when you're panning, like let's talk about like filmmaking for a second. If you're panning from one image, like let's say a close-up of somebody's face, and then you're kind of like slowly moving out and revealing more of the scene to end up showing maybe where they are. Every shot, like every frame from A to B should still be a good composition. And so it's talking about how you can achieve that, what you should be thinking about in between those things, and also how you can apply that to a comic, because whereas you're not really like actually having motion in a comic, you are having motion whenever you are having one big wide spread or a long one where people are going to observe it left to right, or up to down. So in that sense, you are still doing some of that. So in that sense, you are still trying to do some of that. You're trying to show that you get from point A to point B, but every part in between, every like little section that the human brain is going to observe is still a really good composition. So highly recommend Framed Ink. That one is by Marcos Mateo. I think it's Mestre. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But very, very good book. So we're at the last section here, and what I want to talk about is just some oddball books, some different ones that you might see throughout, and most of them are reference books, but some of them that you might see are like graphic design books. So there's this Grid Systems book, and this is pretty much all like graphic design and typography. But where I find this helpful, so it's really just showing these basic elements and giving you like, here are all these elements, right? Here's how you might arrange them in a way that's appealing to an audience. And it's talking about a lot of the principles of graphic design, which are pretty much the same principles of art in a lot of ways. There's, I think, more principles of art, but graphic design is very heavily aligned with it. So I think this one's really good for whenever you are like designing covers or thinking about layout placement. And it does this really cool thing where you'll have this like poster here, right? This is a poster of new wave of Japanese agriculture, and it's a very nice poster, but then it has like this transparent screen here where it'll actually show you the grid system that's being used. So then you get an idea of like how you can use a grid system in your artwork. And I do recommend using grids. I think at a certain point, if you have a really good understanding of how grids work, you might not even need a full grid every single time that you are designing. But it is good to get in the habit of like, let me just throw on a grid, make one really quick so it's not disturbing your art process, and being able to basically align to that grid, make it feel a little bit more appealing. Because I think that is one of the things, like having been a professional graphic designer, that is one of the main things that I see where I can tell if somebody is a professional or not, is if their layouts work and if it makes sense the way that things are laid out. Because anybody can pick a font, anybody can pick some colors and like put them together. It takes some practice for sure, but I think the layout is one of those things where it's like, if the layout doesn't work, if it's not functioning to serve the purpose that it needs to, if you don't understand some of those basic principles, I can tell it's pretty amateur. And so that's why you might have somebody in the professional like comic book industry that is going to do the cover themselves, right? Or you might have somebody who does the cover illustration, but somebody else is putting all of the stuff that goes on top of it, right? Because you do just get a bunch of junk over the top of the comic book, but that stuff's important, right? It's going to tell you what publisher it's coming from. It's going to tell you the title of the comic. It's going to tell you what issue you're on. It's going to give you some little bits of information here and there. I also recommend, if you haven't really done graphic design, or maybe you like make a cover and then you start putting text on it and you're like, I'm kind of ruining it. It looks weird. It looks like somebody just like copy pasted this stuff over the top. That's when I recommend getting graphic design books. There's also some books about type. I think those are helpful if you don't have the natural intuition of like being able to select good fonts and understanding how fonts work. Some people do have that. It's kind of just innate by experiencing this digital world that we live in. Some people don't. And so if you don't, those type books are also really helpful. But yeah, I like to mention graphic design books because they do have a lot of really good knowledge inside of them. Another one, which is super tempting for people to get all the time, and I don't recommend that beginners do this as often, because it can feel deflating sometimes to have so many of these and feel like you don't meet up to the standards, or there's also just like not really information in here that you can digest as a beginner. It's really something that you should get in the intermediate to advanced stage. And it requires you to have a decent understanding of the fundamentals in order to be able to look at somebody's artwork and be able to understand what they're doing, and how they're able to depict the things. And so what I'm talking about are sketchbooks from other people or art reference books, right? You don't want to have a ton of these, especially if you are not a professional. I think that this is really more for professionals who want to pick the brain of other people just by looking at their artwork. Because this book is the sketchbook of Terada Katsuya, who does some awesome stuff, like really good stuff, right? But like this type of stuff is probably not in your sketchbook. It's not in my sketchbook, right? Like this is some really good stuff. But I mean, this guy is a professional. This guy knows what he's doing. And so being able to look at just this spread here and be able to get something out of it and really understand what's going on, you have to basically be at a very, very high level to be able to understand that. So I do warn people from getting books like this because it is super cool. I mean, like, this is beautiful, gorgeous. I would love to be able to draw like this, and I'm sure maybe some of you would too. But it's important to note that, like, you're not going to get a lot out of this if you're not already at a certain level. So I push people away from getting too many of these. I think it's okay if, like, you are a big fan of whoever it is, like, or maybe it's from a certain series that you really like, I don't know, I have a Junji Ito art book. Love Junji Ito, I'm sure a lot of other people do. And, like, if you're just super into it, like, maybe it's okay to grab a couple of those, just because you are a big fan of either the artist or you're a big fan of whatever IP it is. It's all right. Like, I'm not saying you cannot buy them or anything, but you're not going to get as much out of it, you know? And so sometimes that's a little bit more of like an art book that isn't really serving a purpose other than being like, oh, this is pretty and I love to look at it, which again is okay. That's totally fine. It's just not going to be that beneficial for your art learning until you are at a very high level. So another couple books, I have a few books here, and they all kind of go together. And so some of them are reference books of like, say, anatomy, right? So I have this book called The Book of 100 Hands. And so there is some, like, information talking about drawing hands, but it is mostly a reference book, right? It's just showing a bunch of different hands. And I think at some point it transitions to feet in here or something. Or maybe it's just arms. Yeah, I think it's just arms. But it is mostly just showing you like hands drawn in a lot of different positions. And again, this is kind of in that same realm where it's like you have to be at a certain point to be able to fully appreciate it. But not like the sketchbook that I just showed earlier where, like, you have to be a professional. Like, you should be able to draw a hand generally. And then if you want to get better at drawing hands, that's the type of thing where you would access afterwards, right? So that's like your step 2. So it's like, you don't know how to draw hands, you need a book that's going to teach you how to draw hands, right? So that might be something similar to like the figure drawing one, or the drawing on the right side of your brain. The step beyond those types of books would be something like this, where this goes more in depth about drawing hands and shows you hands in a lot of different positions, so you can be able to try that out yourself. So like this one for me, I have read both of the books that I shared earlier that I just mentioned. I've not gone through all of this yet. So this one is one that I just kind of open up every once in a while because I'm looking to be able to express a hand in a certain way, and I'm just having some trouble with it. That being said, I think there are other books that are a little bit better to access right away. So there's this Morpho book, and I've been seeing this a lot more in like bookstores. And it's a pretty good book, actually. Again, it is mostly references. Got to be careful where I open up here because it is anatomy of like anything. But you'll see a lot of really good diagrams, and it'll talk a lot about certain sections and be able to show you a little bit more. So this one's like a little bit more general about anatomy, and it'll tell you a lot more of different, I guess a little bit more broad is what I'm trying to say, right? So like it's going into legs here rather than just hands. Now, if you get this book, know that it's not going to teach you anatomy. It's a supplemental book that's going to show you things a little bit more in depth and show you some things at different perspectives and give you just a broad general look at everything. But that they have books that are more specific, right? So like I have this other Morpho book, which is much smaller, right, than this other one. And this is just hands and feet, right? So it's not the same content. It is different content, but it's like a small, quick reference guide that is super helpful. I really like this series. I think it's actually pretty awesome. And so I recommend that. But they do a lot of other stuff. Like here's one from them that's just clothing and folds and things like that. So it's helpful to be able to access some of this stuff and reference some of it. And I mean, like, truth be told, I haven't gone through all of this stuff because it is mostly just like, you don't read this front to back. You just kind of access it as you need to practice it a little bit more. And I think you need like the big one first, and then you can kind of get some of these smaller ones that you want to focus in on a little bit more to be able to get into what you're trying to learn a little bit more. So these reference books aren't really like read this front to back. It's like get the piece of information that you need out of it and then try it out and then come back to it when you need it again. Whereas books like Grid Systems that are a little bit more in depth on what they're trying to talk about. They're trying to teach you a whole system of being able to draw or compose things, including figure drawing. This is also another one that I would recommend. Reading front to back is a little bit better than some of these other ones. You might be able to skip the first few chapters depending on your like level of understanding of the concept already. But generally, if you're new to this kind of idea, read it front to back. It's going to be really helpful. Another one that's also all the comic books in general. The comic books are good to read front to back. Maybe the Will Eisner one is one that you wouldn't want to read front to back because it is separated into chapters regarding the different things that they're talking about. So like, let's say you're a writer who is already like really familiar with storytelling, but you're not really an artist. So maybe you'd focus in on the art chapters and skip the storytelling one. That's totally up to you. You might still get some things out of the writing chapter. Just be aware that like with nonfiction books like this that are trying to teach you something, you don't always have to read it front to back. You can just skip around a little bit. They're really just kind of laid out where like they might reference things that they have talked about in previous chapters. And so if you already are familiar with some of those concepts, you're not going to be lost. But there are also books that are referencing future chapters later on. You know, you might be on page 12 and it'll say something about the maybe like a 5-point perspective, and it'll be like, yeah, see page 267 for more. And so, you know, you're going to get books that are having you jump around yourself. But yes, I think in general, most people that are going to be watching this video are going to be beginners. Not all, obviously. But yeah, if you're a beginner, I think these 3 books here are very good. Very, very good. Highly recommend them. And they're doing different stuff, right? This is very technical, but easy to understand. This is a little bit more fun. Maybe you have trouble focusing on one thing and you kind of just need to learn little bits of info here and there with some nice illustrations and be able to jump to the next thing. This is good for that. If you're a total beginner and you really want to get into art and you really want to try your best, this is the one. This one could be in the hands of way more AI artists, I'll tell you what. That being said, that's my current recommendation on books. Like I said, I might make more of these at some point, but I have like a ton of art books to get through myself. And even some of these that I've just talked about, I haven't read fully all the way through. And you can't even see it there. Like I have another like little set of books here. I've got another bookshelf just down my hallway. Another one's over there. A lot of art books. I also don't recommend that you buy a ton of art books. Really just start with a couple and be able to move forward from there. The only reason I have all of these art books is because most of them I did not pay a single dime for. It was a benefit that I got through a job that I had through professional development. So like, don't set your expectation that you should have all of these art books and you should have consumed it. Like, this is the only reason I have them. If they were not free to me, I would not have them. So set your expectations a little lower for how much you should have. But yeah, that's what I recommend. Hopefully this was helpful to you. If you're still around, please subscribe and leave a comment. Let me know what you might be looking at getting next, what was helpful to you. Maybe you disagree with some of the things I've said. I'd love to hear that. But that's what I've got. I'll try to leave some links below for some of these books if I can find them. But thank you for watching, Nibblings. I will see you later.